Mark here from Mark 2.0. Brian and I are just thrilled to bring on our next guest, Matthew Chazeret, producer Matthew Chazeret. Welcome to the podcast, Matthew.
Well,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Mark, and thank you, Brian, for having me.
Great
Yeah,
to have you. Appreciate you being
we,
here.
we really are. I want to first ask you, what inspired you to get into the entertainment industry to begin with? And at what age did you know that this is what you wanted to do for a living?
That might not be the answer you expect, but like everything else, it was an absolute coincidence. I had just moved to LA, and somebody told me, there might be an internship in a production company. I thought might as well give it a try, and I got the internship and started in it, and I started working on a project on the Warner Brothers lot, and I just loved it. It was 12 hours a day, but you interacted with the stars, you saw the production world, the rush, everybody always moving left and right, and I just fell in love with it.
How
Wow.
lucky you are.
I know.
And well, the rest, finding the other jobs after that was another challenge. But the beginning was a complete coincidence.
That is interesting. Well, you must have had a really nice life. I mean, where were you born?
So I was born in Paris, France, and I grew up traveling as an expatriate, going from places to places, and I ended up in LA to join the film industry. Now I'm in New York.
Wow.
But yeah, to give you a bit more information, I was born in Paris. I grew up there until I was 8 years old. I moved to Bangkok in Thailand from 8 to 12. Then I lived in Madrid from 12 to 15. Moved to New York, spent I think 5 years there, moved back to France, did my studies in Canada, went to Los Angeles for the film industry, and when COVID started and everything shut down, moved back to New York. And
Wow.
this is how I got in touch with Money, who you interviewed previously.
Oh yeah, we love money. So wow. So you've had a really great life getting able to move around the world a little bit and be grow up in different cultures. So tell me a little about your parents.
Yeah, no, absolutely. As you say, I was lucky enough to have the opportunity of traveling. It comes, of course, with its own cost. But my father was a banker, and he just had opportunities to go in other countries to
Hmm.
spread, the company, and we followed him as children.
I think it would be great to live in everywhere. So tell me about, tell me about what you remember about, your earliest childhood years of France.
France is a bit hard to remember. Again, I was, before 8 years old, but,
Mm.
it's a lot of fun memories. I loved, Paris. I loved, being around French people. We have a certain, little a little arrogance that you would see in French people, in the way they have a bit of sarcasm, and I just
I
it
love
feels like
that.
home every time I go there and I hear the way they talk. But yeah, the food, the people, the sports, and yeah, it's just there's a way of living in France that I love. But the US is an amazing place. I think it's a land of opportunity, business wise. The people are also amazing. It's just every country is a bit different, but they all have their lovely qualities. Um, yeah.
Sure.
I think that's great. Well, tell me about Bangkok then.
Well, growing in Bangkok was something else. Moved there. That was my first expatriation. As you can imagine, moving to a country that is completely different when you are 8 years old is a bit of a surprise. We didn't have the same language. The one where we could meet in the middle was English, but that was another story. We didn't have a perfect English. They didn't have a perfect English. Funny story, I actually had some fish allergy, deadly fish allergy. And I go to restaurants, and Thai people cook a lot with fish sauce and fish. And I'd go to a restaurant and say, I'm allergic to fish. Can you make sure there's no fish in it? And they'd be nodding and bring me a fish. Or sometime, they just bring another waiter who spoke a sort of broken English. Then you have another waiter until you have the director of the place that come in and try to understand what's going on. So it was an affair of having 15 people around you trying to understand what you were saying.
Mm.
But yeah, overall, amazing experience. It's a warm country. It's very different from the Western world. I would say the U.S., France, Europe. It's development that started a bit later. It's a different way of life. They have Thai people have a different logic to us. They're a bit more practical, I would say. And it was just lovely to be around in this country.
And how many years were you in Bangkok?
I spent 4 years in Bangkok, yeah. And I
Then
guess in a way, the traveling around is, to answer your previous question, the passion in film is, traveling around the world. I saw a lot of different worlds, different lives, different cultures. And, one thing that I want to do as a filmmaker is bring a bit of my vision to the screen, show the rest of the world to people who, not fortunate who can't travel.
wow.
Uh,
And then it was Spain you went on to at age 12?
yeah, then
Wow.
went on to Spain, very similar to French, very different, different language, but a similar culture, as like those countries in Europe, France, England, Spain, they share, hundreds of years of history together. So, you'll find French words in Spain, you'll find Spanish words in France, a lot of similarities, but, I miss it as well, the going to restaurant, Spanish people, they're always talking very loudly, hearing them yell
Hmm.
and just celebrate life in a way. Yeah.
What was your mom like?
So my mother was, she started working in publicity, and she uh, she followed with us, and she kind of took care of us, growing up. Made sure we were like opening our books and studying, and having fun. The classic, housewife. Yeah, great person.
A great thing to be good at.
Yeah.
Yeah, no,
An
absolutely. It's
honorable
it's good
thing.
to have a support and love back home, in a way, and especially when you're traveling, because every 4 years, you kind of lose all the roots that you've been building over there. Your friends, your the places you like to go eat or play or whatever, and family becomes even more important because of the people who stick with you. So yeah, no?
Did you have any other things you were going to do maybe in your life? I mean, you kind of seem like you fell into all of this. Did you have any other goals before all of that happened, or were you kind of too young still?
No, I was a bit too young to know exactly what I wanted to do. I always wanted to have a career that, a career when I explored new opportunities, a career that brought me, into traveling, into showing, a bit of my vision. And, I think filmmaking is just a perfect fit. It's always hard to know, even, no matter your age and if you're in the right field and if this way you want it to be, but I think, for me, film is where I want to be. So I'm
Mm.
lucky to have this.
Is that
But
what
then
you
again,
studied when you studied at Concordia University?
no, political science. What a
Wow.
mistake that
No
was.
kidding.
But I love political science, understanding people, understanding how the world works. You always say, if you want to understand, the history of our, civilization, follow the money. That's one thing I learned in police sci. It's always interesting when you read the newspaper, to understand a bit, read behind the lines. And that applies still in my film, as a film producer, understanding the trends, when we're developing a project, know what's working and also following the flow, for example, the Republican of the House, the Democrats of the Senate, how does that affect, the film markets? So yeah, it's always a useful skill to have.
It's fascinating too. It's not people hear political science, and they just run away screaming, but it's what's going on in the world, everybody. And
Oh
right
yeah.
now, especially, it's fascinating to say the least. And yeah, for someone to understand what's going on in the world is critical as a director. No.
Yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And it's just, anything you do in life is never a waste of time. This it's always skills that you'll learn and you can use later in time, negotiating a contract, hiring people, building a budget, so many different skills. Um,
Well, you seem super smart, man. And I mean, you went to school,
Yeah.
in all these different places, and then ended up at Colorado University, I believe. No, Concordia. I mean, sorry.
Concordia, Concordia.
And
Yeah, good eye.
so, and I'm sorry. And
Mhm.
and so you just studied political science there, but did you study any kind of other things in like film or anything like that anywhere?
No, no, no. Funnily enough, I was finishing school at Concordia. and last semester, after decided to go to Los Angeles and explore new avenues. Find, I guess, what we all try to do in a way is find our passion. And I thought, for me moving, so I moved to LA. $50 in my pockets, and it kind of worked out in the end. But you guys all know, I read, you guys were, in the film industry before. You know how it is. The gig economy comes with the struggles and everything, but at the same time, as soon as you get back on set, it's just meant to be.
Yeah. And you work for Disney. Did you ever work at Disney Studios? I worked several times at Disney Studios in Burbank.
So it wasn't unfortunately, I wish it wasn't the Disney Studios in Burbank. It was the broadcast department at Disneyland in LA. But still very interesting experience. We had a lot of, A-list, shoots. And it's a humbling experience to be part of that. We had this shoot with Gucci, with top models from all around the world, Italian producers, English producers. We had the opening for the Galaxy's Edge, where we had a chance to see George Lucas, Han Solo, Mark Hamill, and it's just those people, it's. I don't know what are your passions, but Star Wars is definitely something that speaks to me. So see them in real life was.
Oh yeah, we love Star Wars. We just had the Mandalorian actor on. We just had the Mandalorian on last week.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you guys on season 2 or?
Did you know that the Mandalorian actor is only on screen when his helmet's off, and the other guys who we had on, who's on most of the time, because if you see the show, he never takes his helmet off hardly ever. So it's actually John Wayne's grandson.
Yeah, Brendan.
No way.
It's legendary. Yes, and he was on recently.
Wow.
Yeah. So
Hollywood, right?
so just to answer your question, yes, we are. I am at least a Star Wars nutball. So is Mark, and you know what? Brendan is his name. He is a total complete fan and put his entire heart and energy into developing the Mandalorian character. It's fascinating. So, but and you were saying?
No, that's amazing. First, I'm glad to hear that I'm between friends.
Always
happy to meet a fellow fan, and
So tell us anything you can about this Star Wars experience, because you have my total attention on that. 100%. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, listen, it's just I was doing some shuttling there, and I had to bring talent from point A to point B, and then I had to be the talent kind of wrangler in a way, and escort them from locations to locations, be around them, assist their needs, and just being around George Lucas. And Mark Hamill was, it's hard to describe, because as a person in production, you don't want to say too much to inconvenience the talent, but just hearing them joke around, the way they talk, the way it's just it's people you grew up with, it's
very intimidating
beyond words, I guess.
Yeah,
it was definitely intimidating for sure.
What all was involved in that whole thing? What did you do exactly? It's a lot of photography and stuff.
Well, this was they were opening it. I'm not sure if you heard of it. They were opening the Galaxy Edge park in Disneyland, and that was the first version of it. They have it now in several locations. They have the Falcon. They have a whole area where you have figures that are dressed as rebels, and people are dressed as stormtroopers, and you join them as a guest of the park, and you just kind of fight with them. There's the Millennium Falcon, you can fly, and they have this amazing sort of VR technology where you're like in the cabin and you have different tasks you need to do when you're moving, and the whole thing. It's just crazy, and obviously for the inauguration, we had the ex-CEO of Disney now, Chairman, Bob Iger, and we had all those, big, Star Wars player to, speak for the universe. Disney was an amazing experience. It was the opportunity to really work with the top of the industry. The way I can't speak too much about it, but every production company has their own methods and techniques. And let's say that Disney is one of the oldest one in the books, and they've been perfecting the way they film for decades. It's just being around it. Their communication system, their infrastructure, the way we work is tremendous. It's top notch. It's definitely things that sponge and take with me for my upcoming works. Yeah.
What are your goals right now?
So, my goals right now, so I'm a producer. I've been, I just wrapped a movie and a TV show, and the goal is just, we open up a startup production company, and the goal is just to get more content out there, to get more productions, more projects, and hopefully to find the season 2 or season 3 of a project. And just
What
keep
are
doing that
those
more.
movie and TV shows that you're referring to right there? What are those?
So that movie we just finished wrapping. We finished shooting in March, and it's actually now 6 months later already being released on PureFlix, and it's going to be released in January and February on other streaming platforms. It's called The Thursday Night Club, and it's a story of basically it's 5 college students, best of friends. They live together on campus, and one of them goes through the loss of a parents. And through that, the 5 people, they realize, grief. They realize that there's loss in life, and there's, life is not all good. There's another side to it, and they kind of all go on their spiritual path, vanquish that. One of the person, she's all about, getting A grades and being in the best school, having the best job. It's all about, kind of money. And she realizes, this is not what it's about. So she decides to donate her time to, retirement home and, interacting with those people, learning of their story, it's just a humbling experience for her. And I guess this is what the movie is about. It's about grief. It's about realizing that there's a spiritual component in life, and there's more than just, the appearance of what you see.
We do know about that movie, and we need more movies like
we had
that.
Valerie on. We had Valerie
Yeah.
on last week. So, what was your role as a producer?
So, as a producer, in smaller companies like this, you carry so many hats. But I'd say one of the first things that I do is build the budget. It's hire the people, and then be a field producer on the day, and just manage everybody, make sure everything is going according to schedule. We're not being delayed. Obviously there's always a budget you need to look after. And actually one thing that money taught me is you have this budget, and you divide it by the number of days you're going to be shooting. So when you are on production days, you know exactly how much each minute or each second is costing you, and that really helps you keep on your feet. When you're spending around $6,000 a minute, you're kind of careful, so it really helps you, manage the team and everything. But yeah, for example, for the Thursday Night Club, it was, creating the budget, in development, reading the scripts, seeing how many cameras we're gonna need, seeing how many crew people we're gonna need, how is the lighting gonna be? Is it gonna be extensive? Does it need help? What kind of rigging are we gonna need? Do we need a key grip? Do we just need a grip? See how you can cut cost, but also have the top-notch, production that you need. Make the movie, let's say, make a $1 million production look like a $2 million production. So it's always a challenge to have everything right without losing the quality. But it's such an interesting experience. For example, when you're going through casting, finding the right person, you can have a first audition and fall in love with somebody for a role, and the second audition you realize they're not really the fit you thought they were. And then of course there's people you hire, and then you're working with them and you realize, I did a mistake there. And no, it's an incredible experience. It's a Thursday Night Club. We had to we did some fundraising in Connecticut, all over the US. It was a lot of traveling, it was a lot of scouting, it was a lot of communicating with a lot of people. We had a lot of as every production, some drama. And but yeah, in the end, we wrapped it up. We in 6 months we post-produced it, put it in distribution. It's already released on one platform, and 2 months later it'll be released all over the world.
Nice. Yeah, it's a great film, by the way.
Yeah.
It's a really good film. I like I like the moral, I like the story, all that. And it's a strong project. It's a strong project, and I can't wait to do more scripted content. This time maybe with explosions and all that.
Oh, sure.
So you had a TV show too, you mentioned?
So yeah. So we shot recently actually a TV series called Divine Renovation. We had our host Eric Estrada. He's I'm sure you guys have heard of it. You know, he was an icon
Mm.
on the show Chips in the 80s, sex symbol, and Money Hobbs, our other producer, was a good friend of his, and they just got to chat, and he decided to join the project, and yeah, this project is very interesting because it goes according to our business model for this specific company, Heartlight Entertainment, which we're in right now, which is make a movie at the lowest cost possible. Of course, a good budget so that everybody gets paid normal rates, and there's no suffering there. But like have a strict budgets and sell it after. It's an economy when
Mm.
it's hard to recoup, it's hard to get into profit. You want to make sure the priority is the investors, and so this is the model we went after. And in 6 months again, but this time, in 6 months, went from the development, just the idea, sitting, on a chair, the three of us, and talking about this idea to just making it and bringing it to screens. So, in 6 months, we established the city we're going to shoot at, Wilmington, North Carolina. What an amazing place, by the way. Every time I go visit Money, I always stay in his house, and I just, can't stay. I can't leave. I'm coming for 3 days, end up
Yeah.
staying 3 months. Thank you, Money, if you're listening.
No, it's a great place. I'm
And
actually moving there in April or end of
oh,
March
you're gonna
next
love
year.
it. You're gonna love
Oh
it.
yeah, I've been there before. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, great, great, great. So no, it's just one of the first destinations. I heard everybody's moving there, especially since COVID, the beaches there, all that stuff. But anyways, going back to the project, we shot that in 6 months. We decided, what was the concept? Money had the idea of something, spiritual, but helping people around, renovation, and we just expanded on that idea. We got Eric, as you guys know, and we just, had to do a lot of location scouting, a lot of interviews, find the right families, and we want to find people that any day people, but people who are who might have might be in need of a hands up. Everybody needs some help at some point in their life, and we thought that's a good way for us to come in, have them have a good day, an exciting day with Eric Estrada, and special guest appearances throughout the episode, and just have some renovation done to their house, and just it's it's a little help, but I think it was a good day for them. I think we helped them a little bit, and I hope it's something that helps them keep going, and don't lose faith in in humanity and all that stuff. Life is hard, but there's people all around us who are ready to help. At one point, when one of our families who had a child who suffered from autism, and she had lost like an umbrella at the beach, and she posted, we told her to post something on Facebook to find that, and seconds after, we had like tens of people were like, oh, that's terrible, let me help you buy a new umbrella, blah blah blah, let me help you. So many people ready to help, so in a way, we hope this show and the little impact it can do will help some of those people, or give them more motivation to help out. Those are
Mm.
tough times, COVID, economic, possible recession, so hopefully a good message of hope is, well, it can't be bad.
No, not at all.
Yeah, God bless the internet, that was really awesome, you get a piece of,
Yeah.
so you have these two projects and you have big stars on each one. So what kind of like reaction now that they're kind of winding down and you maybe are thinking into the future, what kind of reaction are you getting actually? I'm sure it's positive, but what's coming of all this?
It's hard to know yet because Thursday Night Club, for example, just came out and there aren't a lot of reviews yet. But from what I heard, from people who have shown it to, from distribution companies have seen it, viewers that we know of, they all love the message. They think it's a good message. There's moments, when you're shocked up. There's moments when you love. There's moments when you're happy. People overall like the movie. It's a simple movie, but it has a very strong message. And I think that a lot of people identify with this. After all, we've all been children at some point, and we'll have all had our innocence crushed in a way, when we're faced with the realities of the world. So it's something that people can easily identify to. But yeah, so we're waiting on it, but as we got a lot of press, we had Dove who gave us a great ratings. They said, they wish there were more movies like this out there. We had Billboard and we had People Magazine. A lot of people are very excited for this movie and really liked it. How it will fare in the end, that will be up to the viewers.
Mm,
And Divine Renovation,
mhm.
we're in the editing process right now. We're putting everything together. Um, I personally love the episodes. It's really coming together. It's fast paced. It's dynamic. It's interesting. You see the renovations. It's full of emotion. And yeah, no, proud of this project. Proud of this project.
What are some of the
Uh,
challenges that the team has been faced with? I mean, strict budget and renovations, that sounds like trouble to me.
Mhm.
Absolutely, absolutely. It
Yeah.
is. It is. There's always. Productions are always filled with projects, and I would say the main role, honestly, of a producer is fixing those problems. I would say the number one thing you do is on sets is just solve issues that come to you. It could come from the budget, it could come from the talent, it could come from anybody. And let me insist, by the way, when I say talent, Eric Estrada was nothing but a pure bliss. But you know how it goes with cast, for example, other projects.
Mhm.
Yeah. What was your question again?
Mhm.
What kind of challenges
Oh,
did the
any
team meet?
challenges? Yeah.
Let me try to
What's been
find an
difficult? Yeah.
example here, but it can go from very small challenges or keeping the morale of the team up, which is very important when you rely on the team to get this project done. And very funny, it's a small thing, but one day, it was after 2 weeks of shooting, everybody's tired. Most of the people are not local to the city we're shooting at, which was New Milford. And they're staying there, they're giving their time, they're giving the energy. In the third week, it's like food comes in, late, if late for everybody. It was pizza. Pizza had been cooked 3 hours before, so they come in
Mm,
stone cold, no drinks. Very
Mm.
small example, something insignificant that could ruin the entire
Sure.
project. People are just like, I don't want to work, I'm done, things like that. Two, suddenly there's no more money. Luckily, we've never had that, but it can range from anything, honestly. Any problem you can imagine can happen on the set.
Yeah.
But that's what makes a good producer, though, the ability, think outside the box and solve those issues. Um, let me see.
What about for Divine Renovations? Weren't you filming when there was a projected hurricane coming to North
Ah,
Carolina?
yeah, I didn't even realize that.
Yeah.
That was that it was funny because
you
again, as
found
you
out
guys
later.
know, no, yeah, we found out we're in the midst of it. No, no, no,
Oh,
no.
yeah.
No, no, we
You're in a
you
hurricane,
put.
buddy. I'm just calling to let you know.
Yeah.
Oh, really? No,
He's really from
you
France. He doesn't know hurricanes.
hurricane. Actually, I was trying to tell people there's a hurricane coming, and people couldn't understand my accent. They're like,
Oh,
"What is he
wow. I love
telling
That
us?"
is
I was like,
hilarious.
"Bastards!" It's not that hard. But anyways,
That's cool.
yeah, we had this hurricane. It was interesting because when you're planning the shoots, you put those dates, you hire the crew, and those dates are pretty much locked. You can't really move a day, move a week, and suddenly we realized 2 weeks before there's a hurricane coming, and we're seeing the reports, days before. Florida, is getting it. Louisiana, it's just, it's bad. You see the structures are destroyed, and luckily we're kind of on the outside of the thing, but we had to cancel a day. Me and another crew member, we went in the thick of the rain to just get some B-roll and footage. It was a bit interesting, but it was a bit dangerous. But we took all the safety precaution, stayed between walls to get everything done right. It's also part of production, it's exciting, but sometimes to get the right shots, you need to put yourself out there. Um, so yeah, there are problems, but there are also opportunities, and at the end of the day, uh, yeah, that's all I wanted to say on that, actually.
What does the future hold? You have anything cooking right now?
Yeah, no, so we actually have some very interesting projects coming up. Right now, we're in talk with San Jose, not the city itself, but with companies and a bit the government of San Jose, and we want to shoot a show over there. The city, it's an amazing city that's in the middle of the Silicon Valley. There's all the Fortune 500 companies there. It's one of the richest city in the world. And I don't know about you guys, but you don't really hear about San Jose enough for being the cluster
No.
of all the technology that comes out.
Mm-mm.
And we're since COVID, it had a problem because people don't want to really, hang out in the downtown area. People are fleeing to the outskirts of the city, and the city is a bit dying energy wise, and there's a lot of, right now there's a lot of companies and non-for-profits that are, creating initiatives to bring people back.
Mhm.
And I have a friend who's building, part of another company who is developing some residences over there. And we had the idea of doing a project together and bring more visibility to the town, and also interview. I can't discuss this too much, but film all the interesting facets of San Jose as a city to bring more, people to it, to show all the good sides of the city. So this is a very exciting project. It's a very exciting project. We're gonna meet a lot of people. We're gonna have a strong star power for this one, and yeah, this will be one of our biggest projects in the slates. We have another exciting project. It's and this one I really like also. Is the story goes this way. There's a missionary that we found, and he's in his 70s right now, but he was in Russia during the fall of the USSR, and he was, as a missionary, he was in Cuba during the missile crisis. He was in Rwanda during the genocide, and he was in many countries at the hardest times. And as a missionary, he had access to the highest levels of the government, but also talking to the people, to the mass. And we thought it would just be great as a documentary to just interview this person, hear about his life, and his point of view, which is away from politics and just what he saw, with the government, what he saw with the people, how he lived through that, how the people reacted, because again, as a missionary, he has he's a very big spiritual component to those people. So you really interacted and got to hear their fear, got to hear negative and positive thoughts that are going through the mind of the people. And I think honestly it's something you need to bring forward, especially when when there's a war going in Ukraine, there are war going in other places, when you have an economic recession, when you have COVID, at the end of COVID. It's important to learn about past crisis and see how they work through it, and see like things that now might not seem like much because it's years and years later and you're not impacted by it on a day-to-day basis, but know that those big things happened, but life will go back to normal at some point.
I will definitely watch that. A
Yeah.
guy on the inside of the fall of the Soviet Union. Oh man.
Yeah,
Unreal.
yeah,
This
Yeah.
guy I'm going to listen to him.
Yeah,
That
no,
is
absolutely.
probably one of the smartest guys.
Couldn't pass it, honestly. It's such an interesting topic, and
Yeah.
again, he was on the inside. And honestly, even if he wasn't on the side, just being there in those places at those times, it's like, wow, what are the odds?
Oh yeah, that's all I mean. I don't mean he was like someone, in the government or something like that, but just to watch that happen and to he's got to have so many great stories.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll tell you
I
about a
would
man
be.
who's lived. Yeah, so this is pretty much everything. We have other shows that are in development, but this is a bit less concrete, and I can't talk too much about the IP here.
Of course.
But a lot to look forward to. We're trying to hopefully in the year 2023 have 3 more releases, or at least 3 projects that are completed and ready to be distributed. Yeah, we want to go faster. We want to do more content and bring more to television. So yeah, just excited.
You
Well, I
really
love
seem
the
like
positive.
a visionary as
Mhm.
with your company. I mean, who would think to try to revamp San Jose by making a documentary on it? That's genius.
Yeah,
It really
and this one
is.
actually we want to make it a bit more TV reality to have more the interaction of the people, to show how, documentary can seem a bit, made up sometimes, but like TV reality has this, unscripted, natural exchange between people that I think are really going to reassure people who are thinking of moving to San Jose, who just want to hang out, downtown again. There's such a great nightlife there. When people realize, it's a safe place to be, it's, yeah.
That's amazing. A mission to get the people to come back to the city because they left.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah, no.
definite sign of the times.
Absolutely, and it's interesting because the more we do that research, the more we see. There's a lot of towns, cities around the U.S. and I'm sure around the world who have the same issue. New York, for example, I live in New York, and it's definitely not what it used to be. It's almost back. But there's a bit more chaos in the street. There's a bit less people in Times Square. There's a bit more, stores that are empty or closed down. And I guess this is a city that this is a problem that every city is facing in one way or another.
Definitely true
Um,
here.
so yeah, it's an interesting project. It's about real issues, and it's just I think it's something important to bring to people. And if not, be entertaining at least.
So Matthew, if you were
Um,
suddenly filthy rich, would you still do this?
yeah, no, absolutely.
You wouldn't
I
just
would
travel
continue to
around
do
and look around.
this.
You'd want to make film and stuff.
Yeah, no, absolutely. First, I think it's important always to have a job, to have something you do in life.
Hmm.
Because truth is, it's good to be on vacation for 2 weeks, but after that, you kind of get bored.
Boring. Yeah.
Yeah.
So Matthew, theoretically, if Disney drives a dump truck full of money up to your door and says, "Make something with this," what would you do?
Listen, I'm suggestible to corruption like anybody else, but
Hmm.
no, I would keep working. But yeah, I
Mhm.
honestly, if I did get that money, I'd probably make another project, something bigger,
Hmm.
something sparkier. One thing I love about, one thing I love about, the film and TV industry is that not only you can shoot, TV reality and documentary, but you can also shoot scripted things that do not exist. You can build an entire universe like Star Wars, or
Sure.
you can add magic and all that. You're the narrator, you're the creator, and it's just such a interesting thing to do. Growing up, I love watching TV, and I hope that one day, I can do TV that people love. We'll see about that. But meanwhile, I'm having fun, so that's all that matters.
What were some of your favorite TV shows and movies growing up?
The classics. I'm a big, I'm all about that commercial stuff. Game of Thrones, Star Wars, Harry Potter, but also serious stuff. Favorite movie, Casablanca.
Mm.
Um, any kind of movie, honestly, as long as he has quality and I think a bit of depth in the dialogue. It's a compelling story. I like it. It's always interesting. If you're feeling stressed or you had a long day or any reason, it's always good to decompress and just watch something that brings you to another place. So yeah.
Where do you think all this is going now that giant film companies are kind of, I don't want to say dying, but they're losing their grip a little bit on the content that's being produced by, things like Amazon, Netflix, and even just people. I saw an episode of The Mandalorian by a fan that was so good. It took me a while to figure out whether it was fan base or not. It was that good. So,
Wow.
where do you think the future of film goes? And
Yeah.
would you rather stay totally independent, or would you like some big juggernaut, behind you?
It's hard to answer this question because obviously I love the freelance and I love the freedom that comes with it. As a producer in a freelance production company, you have much more creative power and control over where you want this to go. While in a bigger company, you don't have this, you're just a cog in the machine because there are many different producers and each producer has a different role. There's story, field producer, there's, post-production producer. So the freedom is not there, but I would say it's just a very different range. I love to have this control. I love to be able to have a vision and input it. But at the same time, on a bigger project with those gigantic companies, you get to do things that are impossible for a small company. You can have a battle between, 5,000 figurines. You can fly to the moon. You can do anything. So it's a very different level. I
Yeah.
love working freelance right now, but I do hope one day to go back to the union, the bigger jobs.
Mm.
Although then you lose a bit of your freedom. You're back at a 9 to 5 sort of. So it's hard to say.
Mhm.
It's hard to
We
say. It's also hard to say who you will be in 5 years. Um,
true,
yeah.
true.
I mentioned you can have a projection. The thing is, a year is a lot of things that happen to you. 5 years, you're a changed man already. So it's unlikely that you will follow your inspiration you had 5 years ago.
Mhm.
You probably got a lot of young people kind of looking up to you at this point. I mean, you've done, all this stuff. What do you tell people who want to get started in this?
No, I'm just at the beginning of my
Mm.
career. It's a strong start. I wouldn't say, but if I had to say, pursue your dreams. Don't be afraid to, not be able to pay your rent at the beginning, be in this crazy gig economy. Just, keep doing it, keep taking jobs, be available on set, and people will recognize your work, and you will start doing more. Uh, the film industry is something, I think it's for the people who have a passion of it in their heart because the hours are so tough. So just keep doing it, just keep doing it, don't be afraid to speak up, don't be afraid to, go to a different company or, just keep doing it.
Yeah. Do you have a social media thing you'd like to give out or anything?
No, not really, but
Yeah.
I'll give the social media, for our company, follow us on Instagram. Our tag name is Heartlight Entertainment.
Mhm.
We have a black background and a blue lighting bulb. And yeah, this is what we do. We're just hoping to create
Nice.
more, I lost my train of thought, motivational, more, more inspirational content. It's trying times right now, and this is just what's speaking to us at this moment. It's just doing good content, but people and just spreading that around.
That's what I'm
Sure.
getting out of this, Matthew. You're a really positive guy with a big heart and you want to do good. And, you don't have a negative bone in your body, and I hope you keep doing these positive projects. And I hope you get that big action
And
project
you're
one
very
day because
smart too.
I know you're going to bring a lot of love
Yeah.
into it, not just action, something that's really, that gives back and that's important to
Oh
people.
yeah.
It just affects them in a
Yeah,
positive way.
absolutely. Listen, it's always hard to say why you do what you do, but for me, traveling around, I saw a lot of, poverty, a lot of richness, a lot of differences between people, all that stuff. And I realized, at the end of the day, no matter what we say, no matter the excuse we hide behind, we just want to have a good day. We want to be happy. And this content, I hope in a way, brightens some people's day. So I'm just happy to do that.
Yeah.
Uh,
You're a smart guy, Matt. And
now.
especially for your age, I mean, really,
And
and it,
even
it
with
it
like the
happened
Thursday
because
night
you moved
club, it
around.
wasn't that Thursday night club, it was like the perfect duration, like time wise. It wasn't 2 hours, it was like just over an hour, wasn't it?
Yeah, no, it was I think it was 86 minutes, so like an hour 26. So
Yeah,
it's the perfect
exactly.
time, I'd say anything above it, you need an amazing script writer or you need more, special effects and more in the back end of the production. So yeah, great length. And what were you saying, Brad?
Oh, nothing. I was just going to say, when these new projects come, I hope you come back on and let us help you promote them and share the stories behind them
Absolutely,
and stuff. Yeah,
absolutely. I'll definitely call you guys.
yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. Been a
Excellent.
great conversation tonight. I
Really
really
was.
can't wait
Yeah,
to
yeah,
see
yeah.
what you do next. We'll be following you closely.
Yeah.
It always makes me feel awkward because I feel like I'm more talking about myself and I don't know enough about you guys now. But
It's okay. It's okay. No,
This is great. This
you
is
know
why
what
we
we
do
do?
this.
It's win-win. We like to interview people. We get a lot of views. We get a lot of love from that, and we help someone like you guys, you're
Well,
not just
yeah,
entertaining, you're doing something positive and helpful. And so, that's kind of why we got into this, instead of there's a lot of things you can do out there in the media, a lot of things,
yeah.
easier, but we just kind of like talking to people and positive people, and we find them, it's been a real domino effect, and talking to you and the other people on these projects, and our viewers are familiar with these projects. But let me tell you guys, if you haven't seen these things, the movie is great, and the show is great. It's got Eric Estrada, and the movie has what was it? Gloria
Gloria
Gaynor.
Laura
Gaynor.
Gaynor was in there. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so they're just great projects. Everybody, go check them out, and we look forward to see what comes next.
Listen, thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you for having me on the show. I love talking to you guys, and I can't wait to talk more next time.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
Most
Well, it was
definitely.
great meeting you, and thanks for being here.
Really was.
absolutely. And
All
Mark,
right.
Brian, happy Thanksgiving.
Same
Happy
to you.
Thanksgiving to
Yeah.
you so much. Thank you
Great.
so much.
Yeah.